The famed crocodile hunter, Steve Irwin, spent his whole life trying to protect his daughter from the dangers of the outer world. The flash of cameras and the headlines, the venomous snakes and the gigantic crocodiles, they are all there. And all the time, he was inside her. Nearly 20 years after his untimely death, a war he could never have imagined, a clandestine fight within the body of his daughter, would force his wife and son into the spotlight before the larger public. As the lights of the television shone on Terri Irwin, she would start to tremble, not thinking of the chance to go down a gorgeous red carpet. Every time the cameras were on her son, Robert would turn his face away from them, and a terrible quiet would come over him. The secret Bindi held for almost 10 years was not only a private battle, but the echo of a conversation Steve had with Terri the last night of his life. The lecture was a warning about the fragility that lay beneath the great might of their family. The reckoning came on a glorious Saturday evening in early May 2026. In the gilded, gold-leafed ballroom of the Bellagio Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. As a tribute to the everlasting legacy of Steve Irwin, the third annual Steve Irwin Gala has transformed one of the most iconic venues on the Strip into a lively microcosm of the Australian outback. The tables were dressed with khaki linens, and ambassador animals from a range of conservation agencies mingled with visitors, all under the joyful humour of Australian comedian and master of ceremonies, Rove McManus. Robert Irwin has discovered a new family of sorts with his recent successful run on Dancing with the Stars. The ballroom was packed with people, from huge conservation donors to celebrity Hollywood cheerleaders to the new family Robert Irwin had gained. And there was a sea of faces there, a testimony to the Irwin legacy. But amidst all the mirth and camaraderie, there was one obvious omission which cast a small pall over the festivities. Once again, as in the year before, one of the chairs at the main table in the Irwin home was noticeably absent. There was no sign of Bindi Irwin. Even before the first meal was served, the question of her presence was already being passed around the room, being repeated and disseminated. The question was not asked, but it was clear. When they finally hit the red carpet, Terri and Robert looked unconcerned and single-minded in their ambitions as a team. But they were greeted with a wall of microphones and a crowd of reporters asking the same question. Where was Bindi? Her voice was sweet, but there was an undercurrent of tiredness after a long-haul flight from Brisbane. The first one to answer the question was Terri. Yes. Tell her. Bindi was said to be doing really well in her recuperation, but the physical demands of traveling overseas was a significant challenge for her at this sensitive time. The assembled press were reassured by the comforting reassurance that her daughter would be there next year for sure to commemorate the historic event. As a mother, she made this pledge. With the protecting assurance, she was only residing near her quarters, where she had to be at this point in time. Then Terri said something that would eventually cause a social media firestorm and reveal the full extent of the battle her daughter had been battling behind closed doors. Her grin was a mother's smile, and the smile of one who had known real weariness, and so she smiled as a mother. It was actually less taxing for Bindi to be at home feeding crocodiles than it would have been to undertake the hard trek to Las Vegas, she said with a smile that contained both of these sentiments. It was only a statement, but it was a statement with a ton of weight, and only a few of the individuals in the room could tell immediately. To fully grasp what the Australia Zoo is, it is vital to have a knowledge of what it means to feed crocodiles. There is nothing simple about what goes on behind the scenes. At the middle of the zoo lies the Crocodile, a colossal amphitheater with a seating capacity of 5,500. Steve Irwin designed and built the Crocodile all by himself. This is the very same hallowed land which hosted the public memorial service given for him in December of 2006. Terri joked that having a daughter in her late 20s was less physically demanding than boarding a plane for Nevada, and she painted a beautiful picture. Terri's statements also presented a picture of the physically demanding challenge of wrestling a 14-foot saltwater crocodile in front of a live audience. What a mind-blowing remark that was. Robert knew the importance of his mother's remarks and jumped in quickly to offer a little more information to the issue. He also told the media that Australia Zoo is a big operation with over 500 staff and is situated on about 500,000 acres of conservation land. Someone had to keep the family's top leadership in charge, and the gala was not the place for that. His face was all smiles as he said his sister was doing a fine job holding the fort, but those who were paying attention could feel a profound feeling simmering just below the surface as he delivered it with the polish that he had accumulated over his career. Bindi had been battling in a struggle that had been going on for 13 years, and, most of the while, the general public, who had been watching her grow up during her adolescence, had no idea that she had been fighting in this combat. She was making headway in her recuperation, but it was hard to tell. They had walked a tightrope of enjoying her rehabilitation and at the same time advocating passionately for her health and making sure she was protected from any potential obstacles that might occur. They had been at it for a while. Terri had called travel challenging when she told of it, as the Irwin family's private lives had been substantially reshaped by a complex and challenging medical background. This remark was not an offhanded statement for the cameras, but a euphemism deliberately intended to depict the state of affairs. In March 2023, the rest of the world found out about her condition for the first time ever, when Bindi shared a candid image of herself in a hospital bed to her Instagram page. In the caption, she wrote, "I suffered in silence for 10 years with awful suffering, countless exams, doctor visits, and scans that gave no answers." She spoke to the crushing emotion she received when she was told that her anguish was something that a woman had to put up with, and the scorn she felt was another thing she had in common with the medical professionals. The very first operation was carried out by the world-famous specialist, Dr. Tamer Sekin, in New York. That was a big turning point at the time, too. During her therapy, she had one of the lesions removed, a chocolate cyst that had attached her ovary to her pelvic wall, along with the removal of 37 endometriosis lesions. And then there was this sudden sense of relief, this sight of a life that wasn't just endless misery. Endometriosis, however, is a chronic, ongoing disease that affects the uterus. It might return. There was a good chance it might return, and in the spring of 2025, it returned with a vengeance. Bindi was supposed to be walking the red carpet at the Bellagio Hotel and Casino that very night for the second annual Steve Irwin Gala in Las Vegas. Her brother and mother should be there, and she should be standing there, proud. No, It had been the opposite. Her failing had been not only unexpected, but very painful. Robert told People magazine that his sister, who is known for openly taking part in events, planned to go even though she was exhibiting symptoms of illness after some time had passed. Her surgeon, however, reached a certain conclusion. Her appendix was about to burst, and it had to be removed, and removed right away. The doctor reiterated that she will always be the one to make sure that her health comes first. In the midst of a flurry of preparations for an emergency for yet another critical procedure, Bindi had flown from Las Vegas to New York. Less than an hour after the procedure, her voice was weak but defiant as she shot a video for her fans from her hospital bed. The video was recorded soon after the procedure was done. She also told them that, in addition to her appendix, which had been removed before treatment, 14 more endometriosis lesions had been removed. She also had a chance to fix a hernia she'd gotten while giving birth to her daughter, Grace Warrior. The two major treatments were the excision of 51 endometriosis lesions, the removal of a chocolate cyst, the repair of an appendix, and the repair of a postpartum hernia. Taken as a whole, the damage that these surgical procedures did to the healthcare system was astonishing. By August 2025, Bindi had at last felt rejuvenated. She said that at the level of discomfort she is going through, she can live a normal life without the continual want to vomit or the fear of fainting. This was incredibly encouraging news, and she told everyone in the world it. Terri had taken the decision to keep Bindi at home for the 2026 gala out of jealousy for the restoration she had worked so hard to achieve and that was so delicate. It was the unspoken undertone that hung in the air of the talk that took place on the red carpet that eventually led to the moment when the family's carefully constructed serenity began to crack. In her own devastating words, she wrote, and that she was starting to see myself again. After an update on the patient's health, the reporters shifted to a lighter issue, a family joke that had been going about for a few months. There's a funny petition out there to try to lure Robert's mom into joining the next season of Dancing with the Stars. Might it be true? What would she think of him? Terri leaned over the microphone at just the right time and said, with a whole lot of laughs, "I'll look at the petition and get back to you in 5 to 7 business days." The deadpan delivery of the statement sent a ripple of humor through the press corps. Beside her stood the child whose scheme of bliss was being carried out to the letter, smiling. "I'm on a personal crusade," he told the Hollywood Reporter in the second half of 2025. His mother was violently opposed to it, he knew, but he was eager to vow that he would wear her down in the end. Neither had realized they could dance, but both he and Bindi had found success on the show. "The genes that make you dance must have come from somewhere else," he said. At the same time that his father, Steve, was an exceptionally athletic person, he said that his father had absolutely no rhythm whatsoever. It was logical to presume, therefore, that the present was a heritage from the mother's side of the family. The atmosphere changed in a single instant, a moment later. Terri's expression changed, the joke having now gained a much more serious meaning. "Just getting asked is a huge honor for me," she said. She remembered Bindi saying to her that her experience on the show was the closest she's ever come to flying. She had never in her life tasted such exquisite and blissful freedom. She spoke softly, but conveyed the account of Bindi's experiences. Robert leaned up to the cameras and said he will do whatever it takes to get his mom on the dance floor next season. Or any season. He managed to do so by taking advantage of the emotional opportunity that had been offered him. The funny plea was the result of a truly awful occurrence that had taken place on national television only a few months before. A night when Robert had genuinely cried publicly for his mother, but no one on the red carpet knew the story. Dancing with the Stars was in the midst of the 5th week of the 34th season. It was the month of October in the year 2025. Each performer was given a routine to do in tribute to someone who had made a significant impact on their lives. This was dedication night, and the performers were given these routines to perform. It was because of his mother that Robert arrived to this view. He was crying while sitting on a couch in the practice package that was pre-recorded, and it was clear he was having a tough time holding a conversation. He told the camera that his mother was the most significant person in his life. As he became older, he realized the extraordinary courage she must have had to not only keep her strength for her 2 young children, but also to keep the huge conservation legacy she and Steve had created together from the very beginning. His father died when he was only 2 years old, and as he grew older, he came to know and comprehend the strength that she needed to achieve it. His father had been there for him at every important turning point of his life, that he had wanted his father to be there. His father's place was taken by her, with her love and support that never wavered. They did a modern dance to the song "You'll Be in My Heart" by Phil Collins, which was in the movie Tarzan. The most thrilling point of the event was when Terri came on the dance floor in a stunning yellow gown. When the music reached its maximum point of emotional intensity, Robert hoisted her up and around in a spectacular arc. At the moment the score was at its highest point, he fell in her arms. The members of the jury were evidently weeping. Robert could hear his father, Bruno Tonioli, saying in a deep, emotive voice he was undoubtedly looking down and beaming with an unbelievable amount of pride. But the numbers were not the most significant thing. What was key was the huge enthusiasm that was in the air at the moment. The performance was scored 35 out of 40. The one that made the most impact on all of us was the one that was caught on video in the rehearsal footage, and it was at that moment Terri herself broke down in tears. Since Steve's loss, she told producers that it had been a little bit hard for her to find a reason to smile again in the extraordinarily long time that had elapsed since his dying. The bottom line, she said, was that the only reason she could force herself to get out of bed every morning was because of her 2 children. I heard Robert say that I helped him feel better, and that was absolutely counterintuitive to me, she added. Looks like I should have known better. A few weeks later, Robert was in another dance performance, one which would just take him deeper and deeper into this emotional trip. A special episode was aired in the middle of November to mark the 20th anniversary of the show. Teams in the competition were given a routine based on an iconic performance from a past Mirror Ball Trophy winner. In 2015, Robert and Whitney gave Bindi her own freestyle tournament to thank her for her stellar achievement in season 21. Working on the dance Bindi had devoted in memory of her late father, it was a foxtrot to the tune of Leona Lewis's Footprints in the Sand. There was a good deal of emotional participation in the attempt that was being made. Following the end of the performance, Bindi herself went out onto the dance floor and, with her brother and Whitney, they held each other in a warm embrace that included the full body. The floor beneath their feet was covered in a frenzy of projected images of Steve Irwin embracing a newborn infant called Robert. They were hand in hand throughout the process. Finally, unable to hold himself, Robert dropped to his knees in the midst of the ballroom. That's why he couldn't take it. The judges said the performance was amazing, awarding it 40 out of 40, the first perfect score of the whole season. Bruno Tonioli termed it a tribute that was poetic and moving. Tom Bergeron, who hosted the show the first season Bindi was on 10 years ago, made a surprise appearance to tell Robert that he had come a long way in his career. Derek Huff, who was crying all the way up at the judges' table, called Robert this generation's beacon of joy. Robert said in his post-dance confessional that he didn't know the film of his father would be used, and that he felt like he was carrying his father's message with him every time he stepped onto that floor. It was a magnificent occasion as the performance paved way for one of the most viewed finales in the recent history of the show. By the time the season ended, in late November that year, Robert was already mentally and physically weary. We were both close to falling apart after 11 weeks of grueling rehearsals, Whitney says. The pain of every single breath, every single lift and spin was excruciating for Robert because of the massive rib damage he had sustained over the course of his life. Whitney took the tough call to put his health ahead of the potential to score higher, choosing not to do a challenging lift that was part of their final freestyle routine. This was to discharge his duty as a protector and to please his mother. The final round comprised of 3 rounds: a quick step picked by the judges, a cha-cha that got a perfect score, and a dazzling freestyle that merged rock and techno. Robert didn't wait a second before grabbing the microphone and thanking the announcers Alfonso Ribeiro and Julianne Hough for finally declaring his name as the winner of the competition. To the roaring crowd, he told them that his sister had been right all along. The performance had irrevocably changed the trajectory of his life, and that was a victory forever. The season finale was seen by more than 9 million viewers, making it the most watched entertainment program of the year outside of the Academy Awards competition. The voting system was overwhelmed with 72 million ballots, double the number of ballots cast in the last election. Bindi and Robert were the first siblings to win the Mirror Ball trophies. Robert was the youngest male champion in the show's history, although he was the first to take home the award. Bindi was also the first of her brothers and sisters to be given this accolade. Tears of pleasure in the eyes of Terri and Bindi, their husband Chandler Powell, and their 4-year-old daughter Grace Warrior, who watched from the crowd. Irwin fans enjoyed what Terri posted on Instagram after that night, a reminder of her family's resiliency. Not only did she thank Robert for his passion and generosity, she officially welcomed Whitney to the Irwin family and showed the world that even a zookeeper could learn to dance. It's been 4 months since I last saw him, and here I was, back on the red carpet at the Bellagio, and all that pride, anguish, and love just came right back out. Imagine if Steve could see all of this. What would he say? For 20 years, this is the question that has been mystifying their family. The Access Hollywood journalists brought it to Robert and Terri's attention. Terri's typical answer was witty and funny and down to earth. "Steve will be absolutely floored that we're in Vegas after all," she said. She was frequently told that people tend to ignore the city's profound humanitarian spirit and instead focus on its reputation as a city of indulgence. The work that was being done in Las Vegas with the purpose of saving the environment and helping people in need had an effect on a global scale, and this was the reason. The answer Robert would give would be the answer that would be written down, played again, and distributed to people all across the internet. He thought about how on a daily basis a stranger would come up to his father with the hope that he would be able to tell him a personal story about how his father had affected them. 20 years later, the message of his father that conservation and passion were crucial was felt more powerfully than ever before. This proved two very significant things. This incident showed how powerful and unifying a force his father was and is in the family. And it showed, he went on, turning to his mother, how very brave an individual this person must be to keep that tradition going after all these years. The woman who stood next to him was the one who he credited with having the guts to do what needed to be done. The practical Terri managed to break the tension with a well-placed joke. To the press, she said, "The one thing Robert had that Steve never had was a desire to take his shirt off for Mother Nature." But the jokes had a way of masking the recurring cycle of their shared pain. Terri said she knew the road from 2006 to that gala stage was paved with a lot of labor and a lot of hardship. But it also had times of immense happiness that validated her life in a positive way. As the family looks to the future, there is one date in particular on the calendar that looms as particularly significant. There will be a day that will challenge that joy and create another moment of joy in that reputation. The Irwin family will observe the 4th of September, the 20th anniversary of the day Steve Irwin was killed by a stingray barb off the coast of Bat Reef. That will be 4 months after the Las Vegas show. The upcoming anniversary is something that is well recognized across the conservation community, and the family is making preparations for it on a daily basis. Robert gave a rare glimpse into his own memories of the disaster that happened earlier this year, sitting down with Anderson Cooper for a CNN podcast and sharing his perspective. He says he feels inexplicably warm and fatherly when he is on a crocodile study expedition in the Australian outback. This is when he senses the distance between them. Bindi had spent a lot more time with their father than he had, and her sorrow was like a sharp, piercing ache. But his loss was like a heavy blanket. He was very honest about the fact that his grief was different from his sister's. On his first trip ever to research crocodiles, he found a big saltwater crocodile and found out that his own father had tagged it many years ago. "It was one of the most meaningful things in my life," he said. It made it abundantly clear that Robert's father was still part of his life. On the red carpet, Robert reiterated his characteristic message of hope. When his sister was convalescing at home, he was with his mother. Talking about the privilege of carrying on his father's heritage of passion, positivity, kindness, and conservation, Robert said it was the most essential goal for the next generation. He claimed he took the task seriously. In the crocodile arena, you can still hear the voice of the crocodile hunter echoing 20 years on. It is the voice of his wife's resolve, his daughter's firm fortitude, and his son's unbounded happiness, all rolled into one.